I really, really enjoyed listening to the Whisper presentation, and I noticed that they had a figure that I thought I would Google. They talked about population density. So one of the use cases, or two of the use cases, sorry, that I'm going to talk about this afternoon have a population density of 0.02 people per hectare. So that's quite a figure. It's kind of important because it represents, of course, the last mile. And so what I'm going to talk about here is how we've approached this in 3 use cases. Now, let me just check. So as you can see, there are a whole lot of people that are interested in rural connectivity, and there's a good list. Well, all of those things are also Māori things. And so my proposition to you all is that what matters to Māori matters to actually everybody. And if we can unpack and solve some problems, then they can be problems that are shared, and vice versa. I've heard some really fantastic use cases today that have some really nice takeaways for us. So I want you to think, as I'm talking about these Māori use cases, how they might apply in your use cases. So let's get this into context. We have 450,000 hectares of Māori land, which are farms. That's a 2-year-old figure. Sorry, I have to actually see it on here because I'm a bit blind. We have 50% of that in grasslands or pasture, 25% is in forest, 17% is bush and scrub, and 0.006% is in horticulture. However, what we need to keep in mind is that that is the most, the primary production is the most common, activity on Māori land. We've measured some of that. We think that the Māori economy, as we call it, is worth about 5 billion at the moment. It's growing quite quickly. And so as you can imagine, we want that to be enabled by connectivity. Like everybody else, we want to be connected, we want to participate, we want to contribute, we want to be competitive, we want to be safe, we want to be smart, and we want to be part of a vibrant economy. Look at me, I'm going behind with my slides. We've got 2 common themes that I think I've heard from some of you as well, and one of them is around affordability, the other one's about access, so infrastructure, when and where. Unfortunately, we have way too many areas that won't be covered in the next round of RBI2, so we're very keen to find out what kinds of solutions we can be a part of. I have 3 use cases. One of them started around 2013, I think, through a group called Ngā Pūwaia, which was an advisory group for Māori broadband activity to the government. That was all about getting people connected, and it may have been as simple as ADSL, but also it included fibre where it was available. The second use case, Midia on the grid, was a very, very isolated marae. The people involved in that said that if you can connect to that place, you can connect anywhere. So that was more than broadband. It had fibre going to the schools, so we wanted to make use of that. And the third use case, Incredible Skies, is our current startup project, which is leveraging off the back end of wired marae and Midia on the grid and asking what else can we do? How can we leverage this so it's more than just access, but we're actually now turning this into something way more exciting. So this is Awataha Marae over the North Shore. They were one of the recipients of our work getting connected. They're an urban use case, and so they had the advantage of lots of people coming in and out. They had fibre going past, and they have a lot of activities outside of the marae. They had education activities. I think they were a PTE as well, so they had training and courses. They also had a health centre next door, so there were a lot of activities and reasons to actually fibre up that marae. This is Manaia School in Fanger. This was part of another wired marae project, or a buddy project to it, at Otangarei in Whangarei, which was an area that had quite a socio-economic challenge. Those 2 in the middle you might recognise. They were there at the launch. John Key there is being asked to add his voice to a song that they had written all about being fibred up. He didn't do too badly, he was a bit out of tune. And then this use case, the second one, Miti Miti on the grid. Miti Miti is in the far north, east coast. That's the Hokianga Harbour you can see. To the southern end is about a 3.5, 4 hour drive on a good day to the ferry. You cross over on the ferry to the northern side, and then you drive out. It's about 15 minutes out to the coast where that red location icon is. That place is really famous for a bunch of reasons. But one of them is that was the birthplace of Ralph Hōtere, the artist. He's buried there. He died about 4 years ago. And there are a whole lot of other activities around that area that are part of our history. The marae there was at the end of a long, dusty road. The only way to get cell phone coverage was to run out to the beach on low tide so that we could see the tower over in Omapere on the other side of the harbour. 5 years ago, I think, or 6 years ago, they were still on dial-up. Then Telecom Spark turned up and provided ADSL, and for the first time we saw people on Facebook. So they were quite a way behind everybody else. This is a hui they're running to talk about bringing fibre into the marae and to start the planning process. They were fortunate to be accepted in the DIY marae in 2015, and so 2014, leading up to that, we were planning to stick equipment and fibre in the walls because they were renovating the main whare, the whare nui. This one is my favourite picture. There are some people in the room who are in this picture, so I want to acknowledge Rowan, and then Antony, who's going to come up soon, was sitting there. We had Vodafone, Maori Public, and Chorus sitting at the same table that day. There's a femto cell sitting on the table, as you can see, and we also had some voluntary technical people who came together to find a solution to fibre up Miti Miti. So this was our first hui. You'll notice that there are coffee cups on the table, amongst other things. This is something you need to think about when you build the relationships, provide beverages. So here's Miti Miti. This is during the DIY marae build. So we've got a marquee sitting there because the house was being renovated. We had to sleep all the workers. We had over 200 people turn up in their high-vis vests to rebuild. It was an absolutely fantastic event over a weekend. The challenge for us was to get it hooked up and working on that same weekend when the TV cameras were there and not to embarrass ourselves. So here's some of the build going on close up. People worked through the night to make this happen. The guy in the pink high-vis, they were the first aiders. There's Chorus, there's Gerard Lindstrom, and I can't see who that is, getting some cable into the building. The guy up there is from Vodafone, helping with getting the femto cell up. That's me putting the femto cell up. And then we had the voluntary tech team. That was our speed tester. That photo, he's very pleased with himself because the speeds were impressive, and we made it that weekend. So that was the final whare. It's up in the far north. Most of the meeting houses, the whare, aren't actually carved. So one of the big things for us that weekend was to have something that was a painted one by one of the young men who had been to carving school and been asked to paint something as a starter to bring that knowledge and that artwork, I guess, back into the house as a starting point. So we manage this off-site. There are 3 of us who look after this through Cloud Tracks, so we can see the Wi-Fi, the access points, and we can manage that, watch when power goes out, watch who's using it, turn things on and off and so on. Our proposal would be, if we had more, that we should have a central point of management to take the burden off each marae who might be looking at this kind of thing and share that across so that we can get the skill and capability to be able to run these things. We have had workshops as well for locals, so we've got a couple of locals there learning about what's in the network box and how to troubleshoot if it all goes off. Over a 12-month period last year, they had 28 power outages due to weather events, so road closures through floods, slips and so on. They were completely blocked off. They needed to know how to get things going again. We had workshops on other things. So this is the locals. We invited locals from the wider region to come in to be part of these workshops. This is the only marae that's got fast-speed broadband for miles and miles and miles. So we've tried to make sure that people from the wider area can participate in some of the learning. One of the things that they felt was important was to capture some of the stories from some of the older residents, which is an ongoing thing. So they've learned to use the cameras, they've learned to interview, they've learned how to hold mics, they learned how to upload their videos to YouTube, which they all did on the same day. The interesting thing is we had contacts from people who are from that marae from all over the world come back and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. We're reconnecting again. We also have a couple of CCTV cameras. So the one on the right is for security. The one on the left, our surf cam, was so that people who are now far away can have a look at our beach. And that's been quite an emotional journey for a lot of people. So that's it there. I've got to go quite quickly. The last use case, Incredible Skies, we thought, well, we've got this great fibre. What else shall we do with this? People are now able to access remote GP services, but they couldn't get their medicines. And then road closures, disaster support, all sorts of things are going on there. So we asked, what could we do to deliver medicines and provide extra support for emergency services? The answer for us was, let's look at drones. How hard can it be? This is the area. The CAA gave us some restricted airspace for 6 months as a starter. It was 874 square kilometres where we could trial or begin trials for autonomous and beyond visual line of sight flight. That's an ongoing research project. They also asked us to open it to local and global companies. So we've had many, many inquiries from all over the world to come and trial their technologies here. The challenges around that, aside from delivering medicines and beyond visual line of sight, autonomous flight, are also telecommunications. So we're in a bit of a black spot. So the femto cell had a coverage of 2Ks, but we do have some hills and valleys and things in the way. We're looking for the next partner to help us with this around the bottom corner of that restricted airspace area so that we can fly drones autonomously while making sure they have connectivity. A lot of you have talked about small towns and communities. A little bit of research that drove some of this was that if you fibre up a community, you can measure the positive economic impact in a couple of years. Because sole traders emerge, small businesses stay, hospitality can now offer fast-speed broadband, anything weightless exports, and so on. So the takeaways for us, one connectivity thing leads to another. It's not just about connecting, it's making sure that you drive and push it even further and really leverage it and really find benefit for those communities. Once we have the infrastructure, the point of entry is almost nothing. People can start doing things the next day. And that's been really important around, some people have talked about how do you educate people about what's possible. That's an important component of this as well. Use cases are in progress, as I've said, and they're all over the country. Many of them are bootstrapping. But you can only go so fast with that. So I think a lot of groups, just like us, are looking for where do we find that extra support, that injection of funds to push it even faster. And that's me for now. I'm going to pass this to Antony, and questions will be after. Is that okay? Cool.
Tēnei te mihi kia koutou katoa. So Antony Royal, that's me. So I've been involved with telecommunications for a little while now, and I got involved with the RBI right at the early beginnings when the government went out for consultation and said, you know, we've got this idea of getting our rural sector fibre up. What should we be doing? And we came up with a few heretical ideas, such as start at the most remote place and work backwards. They didn't like that one too much. We also said, well, if you're going to fibre up schools, then you should fibre up Madurai at the same time. These were debated for some point of time, but they never really took that on. So we've had to do, as Robyn's explained, we've had to do our own little bit of experimentation along the way. But we also started, we actually pitched for RBI, and we didn't get there in the end. It was Vodafone and Chorus that got there. But because we made enough noise, the minister said, well, you know, we need somebody to advocate on our behalf. How about you head up a group, which became Ngāpu Waia, which was a ministerial group, which advised the ministers around how RBI, and they said, oh, well, if you're doing RBI, you might as well do UFB, because that, you know, it can't be that hard. And so we got involved with thinking about RBI and started to think about what are the challenges, particularly for Maori. So there were a few sacred cows that we attempted to knock over. They had some kind of virus, and so we were trying to kill those herds. And here were some of them. Now, we may have made progress on some of these, but the first one was the idea was that if you took fibre to schools, then that would facilitate the schools becoming a centre of community, which you could then leverage the fibre off, which seems like a sensible idea. Of course, we said we should do Madurai as well. But what happened? The Ministry of Education said, oh no, that's our fibre. There's no way that you can actually use that fibre. So there was a big argument about getting access to fibre that was sitting in schools. And I recall being in a room with a bunch of lawyers from MOE who quoted for us parts of the legislation saying why you can't use fibre in our schools, completely at odds with what was intended for RBI in the first place. Now, we have got past that. We do have a number of communities who are leveraging fibre out of the schools, but I don't think yet we've done enough in thinking about how we can use that fibre that sits in schools. Midia on the grid was a really good example where the fibre went up to the school. And what we had to do was dig trenches that went from the school back down the road in parallel to the one that was already there and into the marae, and then back up to the school again, and then all the way out to Fanger, where it was terminated to our ISP. Now, that was quite an expensive exercise. Fortunately, Chorus did not charge us for that. But there are still some challenges for accessing RBI fibre. And this is another sacred cow. We have kilometres of RBI fibre that sits in the ground that you cannot connect to economically. So we've got the likes, there was a marae outside of Rotorua. It had RBI fibre right past the front door. And when they contacted us and said, well, we'd like to connect, the price to connect was horrendous. Now, I get the fact that there's architecture involved and you've got to do Jeep on this and you've got pits and you've got this and that. But the intention was, right from the very start, when RBI was put forward, the intention was that RBI fibre, which would be labelled RBI fibre on a map, if you were on that RBI fibre, if you were a marae or somebody who lived there or a farmer, you could dig your own trench and plug into that fibre. That has not happened. And so my advice to MB at the time when they were thinking about RBI 2 is, how about you fix RBI 1, because there are still some things to sort out there. Another bugbear of mine was our RBI, so I've got a few of those, and the RBI towers, beautiful RBI towers. They were well architected, they were well built, there was cost a lot of money, somewhere upwards about $750,000 per RBI tower. They were architected for 3 mobile providers, and I think up to 5, Caitlin, you remember, I think up to 5 wireless providers to co-locate on those towers. Now, I don't know how many are on those towers now, but I'd guess would still be less than 10 on all of those towers. So there was some barrier that was causing this not to occur, and my argument to MB was, let's find out what those barriers are. And I know, power was one of them, but I mean, they've got power there already. Another was the cost of backhaul from Chorus, but how hard can that be? So there are some things here that we still need to sort out. Another one was fibre over poles. That was another one. The idea that, particularly North Power, who had electric poles, you couldn't put fibre over their poles because the legislation said, oh no, you can only use those poles for putting electricity over. Now, that's got across the line. But I would wonder, though, how much we're actually using that capability to put fibre over those poles. And if you think back to when our telecommunications network was first built, it was nothing for them to get out there with a bit of timber pole and string these copper wires right across the country. I still can't see why we can't be doing that. Now, there is, fibre can go so far, but we need to think about as well how we can utilise those other opportunities, those other technologies, those other capabilities that we have in the rural sector. I just wanted to comment as well on the education issue, particularly in Decile 1 schools. I know this is a rural conference, but there are a number of our communities who are just like rural inside urban areas, particularly our communities that can't afford it. The model of having the Chorus Fibre. So we've got whole communities like in Porirua East, where we set up an education trust out there. We've got communities out there who have fibre outside their homes but can't afford to connect because there's this monthly fee that has to be paid. And so we need to think about different models. We've been doing Spark Jump out there, but we've also got think about wireless. And I just want to make a couple of notes. I can see some winking going on over there. Advocacy, I think there's still as well, Ngāpuhi is not running any longer because the minister from a previous government decided that the job was done. I don't think the job is done. I do think that we need an advocacy group who has ministerial access that can advocate for some of these issues and try and get them resolved. And I just want to finish off on another topic that's dear to my heart, and that's of spectrum. As you know, we've got 5G spectrum coming up. We've been involved with arguing about telecommunications spectrum since 1989 when we took a case to the Waitangi Tribunal. The very short story is that ended up in 2 degrees mobile, which is how we got 2 degrees mobile here in New Zealand. Was stemmed right from that case of the Waitangi Tribunal. But we've got another spectrum auction coming up, and I want to challenge people to think about how we can re-envisage how spectrum might be managed in New Zealand. And we're very brave around spectrum. Does anybody know who this is? This fellow here, his name is Ronald Coase, and he wrote a paper in 1960. It was called The Problem of Social Cost. And he argued in 1962 that spectrum should be auctioned as opposed to managed by government. And there was a comment at the time where somebody commented on his paper, said, "I know of no country on the face of the globe, except for a few corrupt Latin American dictatorships, where the sale of the spectrum would even be seriously proposed." Now, 1989 was the 1989, the Telecommunications Act. That New Zealand was the very, very first country in the world to auction spectrum. And it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years later that the US started to auction spectrum. So we've been very brave about thinking about how spectrum is managed. And of course, there's an argument to say, is this the government spectrum to auction in the first place? But I'll leave that for another discussion. But what I do want to just say is there is opportunity. I'm really glad the RCG has got the 3 mobile providers, because that was another sacred cow. Why can't we, for communities, actually have 1 set of infrastructure instead of 3, because communities can't afford 3 and the telcos can't afford it. So I'm really glad RCG has got together, but imagine what else we could do. There's plenty of spectrum out there that is not being used because it's being underutilised. Kia ora.